Victoria's Sterling froze, looked left, looked right, then exhaled. Nobody saw that. Good. She adjusted her grip on the handle, squared her shoulders, and tried again. The water spread in a wide arc across the floor, pooling against the baseboard in a way that she was fairly certain was not how mopping was supposed to work. She had watched 3 YouTube tutorials on the subject. 3. And still, the floor looked worse than when she started. She was worth 47 billion naira. She had negotiated a hostile takeover at 29 years old while eating a sandwich. She had once reduced a room full of senior bankers to complete silence with 4 sentences. And right now, at 2:47 in the morning, she was losing a battle against a mop in her own hotel. Crown Bay Hotel, Victoria Island, Lagos. 12 floors, 240 rooms. A rooftop infinity pool that overlooked the Atlantic. A restaurant with a 3-month wait list before it had even served a single meal. This was her masterpiece. The thing she had sacrificed 7 years of her life to build, stone by stone, deal by deal, sleepless night by sleepless night. And someone was stealing from it. 180 million naira. Gone. Bled out slowly, invisibly, hidden inside vendor invoices and supply orders and staff welfare budgets that swelled just enough to avoid the automated flags. Whoever was doing it was smart, patient, comfortable. Her lawyers needed internal evidence. Her board needed answers. And Victoria had decided the only way to get both was to walk through the front doors herself, not as the owner, but as the help. Nobody knew her face. She had spent her entire career avoiding cameras, declining magazine covers, sending her PR team to events in her place. It was a habit born from caution that was now, finally, paying off in a way she had never anticipated. Her cover was simple. Her name was Vicky. She was a contract cleaner. She had been assigned to the night shift, which suited her perfectly. The building was quieter at night, the managers were less present, and the secrets had a way of surfacing in the dark. What her cover did not account for was that she had absolutely no idea how to clean anything. She was wrestling the mop back toward the bucket when the door at the far end of the corridor opened without a sound. A man stepped through it, tall, unhurried, wearing the dark navy uniform of the hotel security staff. He had the kind of face that didn't give much away. Steady eyes, a calm jaw, the expression of someone used to watching things without reacting to them. He looked at the flooded floor. He looked at her. He looked at the wet floor sign sitting inside the supply trolley instead of beside it on the corridor where it was supposed to be. He walked over, picked it up, and placed it carefully at the entrance to the wet section without saying a single word. Then he looked at her again. First night? He asked. Victoria lifted her chin. Second. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they are being polite about something they don't believe. Then he took the mop from her hands, adjusted the ring mechanism on the bucket that she had not realized existed, and demonstrated the correct motion, back and forth, not side to side, following the grain of the tile. He handed it back. The cleaning supervisor comes through at 4, he said quietly. If this floor isn't dry by then, she'll have questions. Then he walked back the way he had come and disappeared around the corner. Victoria stood in the corridor holding the mop, staring at the space where he had been. She owned this building. Every tile he had just walked across. Every light fitting humming above her head. And somehow, in the last 3 minutes, she had felt more exposed than she had in any boardroom in her life. Now before we go any further, if this story already has you hooked, do me a quick favor. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe to this channel. It sounds small, but it genuinely helps this channel grow, and it helps us keep making stories like this one for you. Okay, now, back to Lagos. Her cover name was Vicky. Just Vicky. No surname offered, none requested. She had been placed by a staffing agency that Sterling Group used for overflow contracts. She had called in a personal favor to get herself on the list without raising any flags. The night shift assignment was her own request. Nobody questioned it. Night shift was the slot nobody else wanted. His name, she found out the next evening from the staff rota pinned inside the break room, was Daniel Cole. Night security. He had been with the hotel since pre-opening, hired 4 months ago as part of the early setup crew. Before that, the rota sheet said simply, previous employment, corporate sector. No company name, no reference contact listed. She noticed that detail and filed it away quietly. The break room was a small, slightly too warm space behind the kitchen on the ground floor. It had a microwave that took 4 minutes to heat anything, a kettle that screamed when it boiled, and a table with one leg shorter than the others that rocked gently if you leaned on it. At 3 in the morning, it became the most populated room in the building. The cleaners came through in rotating shifts, pulling off rubber gloves and dropping into chairs with the particular exhaustion of people who worked while the rest of the city slept. Margaret ran the cleaning team the way a general runs an army, with absolute authority and zero tolerance for excuses. She was 55 years old, had been in hotel housekeeping for 30 of those years, and had developed the ability to assess a person's entire character within 40 seconds of meeting them. She looked at Victoria on the third night, looked at her hands specifically, and said without any preamble, "Your hands are too soft for this work." Victoria looked at her hands. "I moisturize. Nobody on a contract cleaning salary moisturizes like that." Margaret said it pleasantly, the way people deliver observations they want you to know have been made, without making it an outright accusation. Then she poured herself a cup of tea and changed the subject entirely, and Victoria spent the rest of that shift wondering exactly how much the older woman had already pieced together. It was inside those break room conversations that Victoria began to understand the real texture of the hotel. Not the version that lived in financial reports and architectural renderings, but the breathing, complicated, human version. Who was reliable? Who wasn't? Which suppliers had relationships with management that went beyond professional? Which budget lines were being spent in ways that made people uncomfortable but that nobody said out loud? Raymond Blackwell, the general manager, had an office on the second floor with a direct view of the lobby below. He wore suits that cost more than most of his staff earned in 2 months. He smiled with every tooth visible. He had a habit of appearing on floors where he had no operational reason to be, asking questions framed as friendliness that were actually surveillance. The staff were polite to his face and silent about him everywhere else. He approved the upgraded linen order last month. One of the older cleaners, a quiet woman named Susan, mentioned one night while folding towels. "But the linen we received was the same grade as always. I checked the brand on the packaging myself." Nobody responded to that, but everyone in the room had heard it. On her fourth night, Victoria found the first real thread. She was returning a linen trolley to the storage room on the third floor when she passed the open door of the housekeeping office. Blackwell was inside with a vendor representative, a man she had seen twice before making deliveries at odd hours. The door was not fully closed. She did not stop walking. She did not slow down, but her ears caught 3 seconds of conversation, and those 3 seconds were enough. Same arrangement as before. 20% back to the account by Friday. She kept walking, heart steady, face blank. She had learned a long time ago to save the reaction for when she was completely alone. What she had not anticipated was that Daniel Cole would be leaning against the wall at the end of that corridor when she turned the corner, and that her composure, which had held perfectly through the last 3 seconds, cracked entirely the moment she almost walked directly into him. He caught her by the elbow. She pulled back instinctively. "Sorry," he said. He let go immediately. "You look like you were somewhere else." "I'm fine," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Not the way Blackwell looked at her, which made her feel like something being assessed, but in a quieter way. Like someone trying to determine whether the answer she had given was the one she actually meant. "There's rice in the break room," he said simply. Margaret brought extra. Victoria looked at him. Such a normal thing to say. Such a completely ordinary, human thing to say in the middle of a building full of secrets. She felt something shift in her chest that she immediately decided to ignore. "Thanks," she said, and walked away. But she went to the break room, and he was already there, sitting at the wobbly table with 2 plates. They ate in the kind of silence that is not uncomfortable, but is instead the very beginning of something neither person has named yet. Outside, Lagos roared on through the night. Inside, in a small warm room with a rocking table and a screaming kettle, a billionaire and a man she did not yet fully understand sat across from each other eating rice. And neither of them said who they really were. By the end of the first week, Victoria had developed something she had not expected, a routine. She arrived at 10 minutes to 11 every night, changed into her uniform in the locker room at the end of the basement corridor, and collected her assignment sheet from the trolley bay. She had gotten better with the mop. Not good. Margaret would never have described her as good, but functional. She no longer flooded the floors. She had learned which chemicals went on which surfaces. She had stopped mixing up the linen trolleys for rooms 201 through 220 with the ones for 221 through 240, which had been, according to Margaret, a catastrophe of biblical proportions when it happened the first time. Small victories. She took them. What she had not expected was how much she would come to understand about people by watching them work. In her world, the boardroom world, the deal-making world, people performed. They curated. They presented carefully constructed versions of themselves designed to project competence or authority or likability, depending on what the moment required. Nobody did that on the night shift. At 3 in the morning, after 4 hours of physical labor, with sore feet and rubber-glove hands, people were simply themselves. Susan, the quiet cleaner who had noticed the linen discrepancy, turned out to have a laugh that filled an entire room when something genuinely struck her as funny. She was saving money to bring her daughter from Port Harcourt to Lagos for university. She talked about this daughter, Grace, 17, top of her class, with a particular kind of fierce, luminous pride that Victoria found unexpectedly moving. There was also Thomas, 23, who cleaned the lobby floors and was studying accounting part-time. He carried a small notebook in his breast pocket and wrote things in it during breaks. When Victoria asked him what he wrote, he looked slightly embarrassed and said, "Ideas. Just ideas." She did not press him, but she thought about that notebook for the rest of the night. And then there was Daniel. He was not talkative in the way that people who want to be liked are talkative. He did not fill silences with noise. But when he said something, it was worth hearing. He had a habit of noticing things, small things, the kind most people walked past without registering. The crack forming in the grouting along the east corridor wall. The elevator on the 4th floor that hesitated half a second too long before its doors opened. The loading bay door that needed its hinge oiled because it was starting to catch. He reported all of these things through the proper maintenance channels. Quietly, without making a performance of it. Victoria watched him do this and felt something she recognized after a moment as respect. On the 8th night, they ended up on the loading dock together. It was not planned. Victoria had stepped outside for air after a particularly suffocating hour in the linen storage room, and Daniel was already there, sitting on the low concrete ledge with his back against the wall, looking out at the narrow service road that ran behind the hotel. Beyond it, over the rooftops, the Lagos sky had that particular deep orange-gray color it got at night, lit from below by the city, pressed from above by clouds coming in off the water. She sat down at the opposite end of the ledge, not next to him, just in the same general vicinity. "Can't sleep?" she asked, then remembered immediately that neither of them were sleeping. They were working. It was a stupid thing to say. "Can't sleep," he agreed, in a tone that suggested he had decided to be kind about the question. She looked out at the sky. "Do you like the shift?" "I like the quiet," he said. "Most people don't. They find it lonely. But quiet is," he paused. "It gives you space to think." "What do you think about?" He turned his head and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Right now? I'm thinking about why someone who clearly hates cleaning keeps showing up every night to clean." Victoria's heart did one hard, clean beat. She kept her face perfectly neutral. "I don't hate it. I'm just still learning." "You're learning," he said. "That part is true." There was a silence. Not an uncomfortable one. "I'm thinking about my sister," he said then, and the slight change in his voice told her this was the real answer. The one underneath the first one. "She wants to drop out of university. Says the course isn't what she thought it would be." "What did you tell her?" "I told her to finish the year before she decides anything. That you can't know what something is worth until you've given it a real chance." He paused. "She told me I was being old-fashioned." "Are you?" He considered this with the seriousness of someone who actually wanted to answer accurately. "Probably. In some ways." He looked at her. "What about you? Do you have siblings?" "No," Victoria said. "Only child." "That explains some things." She turned to look at him sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means you're used to figuring things out alone," he said simply. "You don't ask for help easily. You'd rather struggle with something for 20 minutes than say you don't know how to do it." The accuracy of this was deeply irritating. "You've known me for 8 days," she said. 7.5, he corrected. "But some people are easier to read than they think they are." She wanted to tell him that she was, in fact, extraordinarily difficult to read, that she had sat across tables from some of the most perceptive minds in Nigerian business and not given a single thing away, that she had built an empire partly on the strength of her ability to remain unreadable under pressure. She said none of this. Because the uncomfortable truth, sitting there on that concrete ledge in the warm Lagos night, was that he was right. And she knew he was right. And that terrified her more than anything Raymond Blackwell had said into that open doorway. She went home at 6 that morning and sat in her real apartment, clean, quiet, full of expensive things that suddenly felt slightly hollow, and opened her laptop and typed Daniel Cole's name into the private search database her head of security had access to. The results were thin. Deliberately thin, she thought. A LinkedIn profile that had been inactive for 8 months. A mention in a business journal from 4 years ago. Something about a corporate restructuring project he had contributed to. Unnamed firm, unnamed client. A university record. An address in Abuja that her database flagged as a previous residence, not current. Nothing that explained the careful blankness of his staff rota entry. Nothing that explained the way he watched everything in the building with the eyes of someone who was not simply keeping it safe, but studying it. She closed the laptop and told herself it meant nothing. She went back the next night anyway. The investigation, meanwhile, was moving faster than she had anticipated. She had begun photographing documents during the brief windows when the housekeeping office was unlocked and unoccupied. Inflated vendor invoices, purchase orders approved by Blackwell with signatures that didn't match the company's authorized signatory list, a series of petty cash disbursements that were neither petty nor accounted for. She had a system. A small, high-resolution camera disguised inside a pen. A secure folder on an encrypted drive that she accessed only from her personal phone, never the work one. She was good at this part. This part felt like the boardroom. Controlled. Strategic. Clean. It was everything else that felt dangerously out of control. The night she almost kissed him, she had not seen it coming. That was the part she kept returning to afterward. Not the almost kiss itself, but the fact that she had not seen it approaching. Victoria Sterling always saw things approaching. That was her entire skill set. The power had gone out on the 9th floor without warning. Full darkness, sudden and complete, the emergency lighting taking 4 long seconds to kick in. She had been in the middle of restocking a service trolley at the end of the corridor. Daniel had been doing his rounds on the same floor. She heard him before she saw him. Footsteps. Unhurried, moving toward her through the dark. "It's me," he said, before she could say anything. As if he knew she was there. As if he had known exactly where she was. The emergency lighting came on. Pale. Amber. Barely enough. He was closer than she had realized. 2 feet away, maybe less. He had a small torch in his hand that he had not switched on. She did not know why that detail stayed with her. He looked at her. She looked at him. For seconds. 5. The generator hummed to life somewhere deep in the building, and the corridor lights returned to full brightness, and the moment dissolved like it had never existed. "All good?" he asked. "All good," she said. He nodded and continued his rounds. She stood beside the trolley and pressed one hand flat against the wall and breathed. She was in serious trouble. The call came on a Thursday morning. Victoria was sitting at her real desk in her real office on the 14th floor of Sterling Group headquarters, still carrying the faint smell of industrial cleaning fluid that she had not quite managed to scrub off her wrists. She had been awake for 31 hours. She had a coffee in one hand, a highlighter in the other, and 3 pages of photographed documents spread across her desk that she was cross-referencing against the original budget projections for Crown Bay Hotel. She was close. 2 more nights, maybe 3, and she would have everything she needed. Her phone rang. The name on the screen said Eleanor Grant. Eleanor was 68 years old and had been on the Sterling Group board since the company was small enough to fit its entire operation into a 2-room office in Acadia. She had believed in Victoria before Victoria had fully believed in herself. She was the kind of woman who said exactly what she meant, always, without decoration or softening, and whom Victoria trusted more than almost anyone alive. Which was why the tone of her voice when Victoria answered made the coffee go cold in her hand. "There is something you need to know," Eleanor said. "And I need you to let me finish before you say anything." Victoria put the coffee down. "Go ahead. 6 weeks ago, the board voted on a resolution. Without consulting you." A pause. They were frightened, Victoria. The missing money, the timeline pressure, the whispers that the pre-opening budget had been mismanaged, they panicked. And when boards panic, they do things they should have discussed openly and didn't. "Eleanor." Victoria's voice was very quiet. "What did they do?" "They hired an independent investigator. Someone external, no connection to Sterling Group. no prior relationship with you or anyone on the senior team. His brief was to embed himself inside Crown Bay and conduct a full review of the operation. That includes the financial irregularities. That includes your decision-making on the project. That includes, Eleanor stopped. That includes determining whether your personal liability in the losses could be established. The room was completely silent. They thought I was stealing from my own hotel, Victoria said. They thought the situation needed independent eyes. That is how they framed it. Another pause. I opposed it. I want you to know that. I opposed it in the room, and I was outvoted, and I have been uncomfortable about it ever since. I am telling you now because I have spent 6 weeks deciding whether loyalty to the board's process outweighs loyalty to you. And I have decided it does not. Victoria stood up from her desk. She walked to the window. 14 floors below, Victoria Island moved through its Thursday morning. Traffic thickening on the express, the lagoon glittering in the distance, the city entirely indifferent to the fact that her chest felt like something had just cracked open inside it. What is his name? She asked. A pause that lasted slightly too long. They only gave me a code reference. But I pulled the original contract from the legal files yesterday evening. Eleanor's voice was careful now. Precise. The voice of someone delivering something they know will land hard. His name is Daniel Cole. Victoria did not move. She stood at the window for a long time after the call ended. The city below kept moving. A bus changed lanes. A hawker crossed between 2 cars. A woman on a balcony across the road was hanging laundry in the early morning sun, moving with the easy, unhurried rhythm of someone whose Thursday was entirely ordinary. Victoria replayed every conversation. Some people are easier to read than they think they are. You're used to figuring things out alone. Have you ever met Victoria Sterling? And she had laughed at that. She had actually laughed. Every question she had thought was curiosity. Every moment of quiet attention she had mistaken for genuine interest. The way he had stayed close without being obvious about it. The way he always seemed to be on the same floor she was on, in the same corridor, at the right moment. She had thought it was coincidence. She had thought, and this was the part that made her jaw tighten, she had thought it was something else entirely. She went back that night. She did not know why she went back. She had enough documentation to hand to her lawyers in the morning. Blackwell was finished. The investigation was done. There was no operational reason to return to Crown Bay in a cleaner's uniform and spend another night on those floors. But she went back. She was assigned to the 11th floor. She worked through it mechanically, her mind elsewhere, her hands doing the job her brain had finally learned to delegate to muscle memory. She scrubbed and wiped and restocked and folded and did not think about anything except the next task in front of her, because thinking about anything beyond the next task felt, at that particular moment, like too much. At 3 a.m., she went to the break room. He was there. He was sitting at the wobbly table with a cup of tea, not eating, not reading, just sitting with the particular stillness of someone who is waiting for something they are not certain is coming. When she walked in, he looked up and something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that knew. Margaret was in the corner pretending to reorganize the condiments shelf with enormous concentration. Give us a minute, Margaret, Victoria said. Margaret looked between them, picked up her tea, walked out with the dignified unhurriedness of someone who had absolutely seen this coming and was not surprised in the slightest. The door closed. Victoria sat down across from him. Not beside him. Across. She wanted to be able to see his face. How long have you known? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone deciding whether to lie. The quiet of someone deciding where to begin. Day 4, he said. Your hands were wrong. Contract cleaners who need the work have hands that show it. Yours didn't. He paused. And you kept looking at the ceiling corners. The cameras, she said. You were checking the coverage. Not the way staff check them. Staff don't think about cameras at all. You were checking them the way someone checks them when they're thinking about blind spots. He looked at her steadily. And then on day 6 you spent 11 minutes outside the housekeeping office restocking a trolley that took 4 minutes to restock. You timed it, she said. I noticed it, he said. There's a difference. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. The fluorescent light above the table hummed faintly. Outside the break room door, she could hear the distant sound of a trolley wheel on tile. My report to the board, he said, before she could speak again, reflected the truth. Within the first week, it was clear that the financial irregularities were not originating with you. I documented that. I submitted it. Blackwell's name appears in my findings going back to day 9. He paused. You were never the problem, Victoria. It was the first time he had used her real name. It landed differently than she expected. Then why did you stay? She asked. If you had what you needed, why did you keep coming back? He looked down at the cup in his hands, then back up at her. Because the job told me who you were on paper, he said. Billionaire. Founder. Driven. Controlled. Difficult to work with, according to 2 board members I spoke to in my preliminary briefing. He paused. But none of that was what I saw on this shift. I saw someone who came to a building she owns and learned how to clean it with her own hands because she refused to let someone steal from it without a fight. I saw someone who remembered Susan's daughter's name after hearing it once, who didn't look through Thomas like he was furniture, who sat on a concrete loading dock and ate rice from a styrofoam plate, and was, he stopped. Real. You were just real. The words sat in the room between them. You lied to me, Victoria said. Yes, he said. He did not dress it up. I did. You let me trust you while you were investigating me. Yes. That's a significant thing to have done, Daniel. I know. His voice was steady but not unaffected. I know exactly what it is. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. She looked at him for a long time. The anger was real. She could feel it sitting in her chest, solid and justified. But underneath it, deeper than it, was something else that she did not yet have the right words for. Something that had been building since the 8th night on the loading dock. Since the power cut on the 9th floor. Since 100 small moments she had been cataloging without admitting to herself that she was cataloging them. You let me fall, she started. Then stopped herself. Recalibrated. You let this become something that it shouldn't have become. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Something open. Something that had stopped being careful. Did I? He said quietly. Or did we both let that happen? The kettle on the counter clicked off. Neither of them moved. 3 days later, Raymond Blackwell was arrested. It happened on a Monday morning, quietly and without drama, which was how Victoria had arranged it. She had learned a long time ago that the most devastating things did not need to be loud. 2 lawyers, 1 forensic accountant, and a representative from the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission walked into Crown Bay Hotel at 9:45 in the morning while the lobby was still being prepared for the day. Blackwell was in his office reviewing the week's scheduling when they knocked. He looked up, saw the faces in his doorway, and understood immediately what was happening. He did not shout. He did not run. He simply sat back in his chair, pressed his lips together, and said nothing at all. Victoria watched it from the corridor through the glass partition. She was in her real clothes, a cream blazer, dark trousers, heels that clicked on the same marble floors she had mopped 11 nights in a row. A few members of staff recognized her from the company website and stopped what they were doing and stared. Most did not know her face and simply noted that whoever this woman was, she was standing very still and watching Raymond Blackwell's office with the expression of someone who had been waiting a long time for a specific moment to arrive. The recovered sum, once the full audit was completed, came to 210 million naira. The over-invoicing scheme had been running for 7 months, routed through 4 separate vendors who had all been willing participants. Every thread led back to Blackwell. The evidence Victoria had gathered during her 2 weeks on the night shift formed the backbone of the case. Her lawyers called it thorough. The EFCC investigator called it unusually well-documented for an internal source. Victoria called it 11 nights of terrible mopping and said nothing further. The board issued a formal apology 3 days after the arrest. It arrived in her inbox as a PDF, carefully worded, signed by all 7 members. She read it once, forwarded it to Eleanor Grant with a single line. Next time, trust me first, and went back to work. The hotel opened on a Tuesday in November. It rained. Not the polite Lagos drizzle that could be managed with umbrellas and soft lighting, but heavy, warm, relentless rain that came off the Atlantic and meant business. The lobby looked extraordinary anyway. Victoria stood at the edge of the mezzanine and watched the first guest walk through the doors and stop and look up at the atrium ceiling, and she felt something quieter and deeper than triumph settle into her chest. Margaret was there in a deep green dress, good shoes, the bearing of a woman who had arrived as a guest and intended to be treated as one. Susan came with Grace, her daughter, tall and bright-eyed, and looking around the lobby like she was storing everything away for later. Thomas had his notebook in his breast pocket. Victoria had personally arranged invitations for every member of a night shift crew. She crossed the lobby and shook Margaret's hand. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "You did all right," she said. "For someone who didn't know how to mop." "I had a good team," Victoria said. Margaret made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was the next best thing, and moved toward the restaurant. And Victoria watched her go and felt something warm and uncomplicated move through her chest. By 11, the lobby had quieted. The last guest had checked in. The rain outside had softened. Victoria walked to the back of the building still in her heels, her blazer slightly damp at the shoulders. She pushed open the heavy service door at the end of the corridor and stepped out onto the loading dock. He was already there. Daniel was sitting on the low concrete ledge in his own clothes. Dark trousers, a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He had 2 plates of rice from the staff kitchen beside him. The rain had left the air clean and cool, and the sky above the service road had that deep orange-gray color that Victoria had come to associate with this specific hour in this specific city. He looked up when she stepped through the door, and something in his face, something that had been tense and uncertain, settled when he saw her. She crossed the dock and sat down beside him. Not at the opposite end. Beside him. He handed her a plate. She took it. They ate in silence for a while and listened to the rain finish itself against the rooftops. "The hotel is beautiful," he said. "It is," she agreed. "The lobby ceiling. That light installation. That was the thing you fought the board about in March." She looked at him sideways. "You read the board minutes?" "I read everything." A pause. It was worth the fight. She almost smiled. They ate. The city hummed around them. Then Daniel put his plate down and turned to face her, and Victoria knew from the shift in his posture that something was coming that was different from everything that had come before. She put her own plate down and waited. "I have thought about how to say this correctly for 3 weeks," he said. "And I have not found a version that doesn't require me to simply say it plainly, so I am going to say it plainly." He looked at her directly, without flinching. "I came to this hotel to do a job. I did the job, but somewhere between the 4th night and the last night, I stopped being here because of the job. I stayed because of you, because of who you are at 3 in the morning when you think nobody important is watching, because of the way you remembered Susan's daughter's name after hearing it once, because of the way you sat on this ledge and talked about nothing and made it feel like something." He paused. "I know I lied to you. I know what that cost. I know I don't have the right to sit here and say any of this without first acknowledging that I hurt you and that it was real and that I am sorry, genuinely, completely sorry, for every day I let it continue without telling you the truth." Victoria looked at him. The loading dock was quiet. Inside the hotel, behind the walls, Crown Bay was alive with its first night, guests and music, and the low, warm sounds of a building doing what it was built to do. Out here it was just the 2 of them and the cool, clean air and the city beyond the rooftops. "Daniel," she said. "I know," he said. "I know it's complicated. I know who you are, and I know who I am, and I know this is not a simple thing. But I would rather say it and have you walk back through that door and never speak to me again than sit here one more night pretending I feel something ordinary when what I actually feel is." "Daniel," she said again, softer this time. He stopped. She reached across and took his hand. Not dramatically, not with ceremony, just simply the way you reach for something you have been meaning to reach for and finally decide to stop waiting. He looked down at her hand in his, then up at her face. "I am not easy," she said quietly. "I need you to know that going in. I work too much. I find it genuinely difficult to ask for help. I will almost certainly try to manage situations that I should just talk to you about instead. I am better at building hotels than I am at." She paused. "This." "I know," he said, and he was almost smiling now. "I watched you for 2 weeks, remember? I have full documentation." She laughed. It came out fully and without calculation, and he looked at her when it happened with an expression so open and unguarded and warm that it stopped her breath slightly. He lifted his free hand and touched her face, just briefly, just his fingertips against her jaw, and she leaned into it the smallest amount, just enough to tell him what she meant. And then he kissed her, gently at first, The way you do something you have been careful about for a long time. And then with more certainty, the way you do something you have decided to stop being careful about. When they pulled back, the city was still there, still going, entirely indifferent the way Lagos always was. But the loading dock felt different. Or maybe she felt different. She wasn't entirely sure there was a distinction. 6 months later, Crown Bay Hotel had a 5-star rating, a wait list for the restaurant that had extended to 5 months, and a profile in a travel magazine that called it the finest new hotel on the Lagos waterfront. Victoria framed the article, not for her office, but for the break room on the ground floor, next to the wobbly table and the screaming kettle, with a small note underneath it that said, "Built by this team." Margaret saw on a Tuesday morning and said nothing, but she straightened it on the wall very carefully before she started her shift. Daniel moved his operations to Lagos permanently. He started a small independent investigations firm with 2 partners, took on corporate cases, and was home by 7 most evenings. On the nights Victoria worked late, which was most nights, he brought food to the office and sat on the other side of her desk and read while she finished. She had told him once that he didn't have to do that. He had told her he was aware of that, and he kept doing it. On the 6-month anniversary of the opening, they went back to the loading dock. Same ledge, same rice, same city overhead doing what it always did. "You're still a terrible cleaner," he said. "I have people for that now," she said. He laughed, and she leaned against his shoulder, and below them Lagos moved through its evening, loud and bright and relentless and completely, perfectly alive. This story carries 3 quiet lessons inside all its noise and drama. The first is that integrity is not what you perform for an audience. It is what you do in the dark, in an empty corridor, when the only person watching is yourself. The second is that love does not announce itself conveniently. It arrives sideways, at inconvenient hours, wearing a security uniform and carrying a wet floor sign, and it asks you to be brave enough to reach for it anyway. And the third is that the people who see you at your most ridiculous and choose to stay, those are the ones worth keeping. Victoria Sterling came to Crown Bay Hotel to catch a thief. She caught him, and on a concrete loading dock in the middle of Lagos, eating rice from a styrofoam plate, she found something she had not known she was missing. It turned out to be the best thing she ever built. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the very end. It means everything that you stayed with Victoria and Daniel through every twist, every secret, and every late night on that loading dock. If this story made you feel something, share it with someone who deserves a good story today. Drop a comment below and tell us one word that describes Daniel Cole. And if you're not yet subscribed, please do it now, because it costs you nothing and it helps this channel grow, and it helps us keep making stories like this one just for you. Every single like, every comment, every share genuinely makes a difference. We will see you in the next one.